I'm going to run through a collection of 18 new records that I've just purchased and a bit about each of them, why I got them, and from these artists whether I've still got more that I'm trying to collect. And I'll also give you a bit of an overview of what I might like about the album or the album cover. So the first one I'm going to cover is The Cult Electric. It's from 1987. I've already got a couple of Cult albums. I've got Love and Sonic Temple. Sonic Temple is actually my favourite that they've done. And this was the last one that I needed to complete my Cult collection. And really, there's a couple of good songs on there. Wildflower and Love Removal Machine, even Born to Be Wild. So it's a pretty solid album. Probably my second best Cult album. Next one is another band where I quite liked them back in the late 80s and early 90s, but I didn't have any records from them. So this is the first D.A.D, Disneyland After Dark album. This is Risking It All from 1991. The 1989 album No Fuel Left for the Pilgrims was actually my favourite album, and I still need to get that one. I don't have it. Whereas this one, I didn't really like it as much at the time, and really didn't sort of like look to add it to my collection super fast, but it came up and I thought it's worth adding in. There's a couple of good tracks on there, and I've still got to search for No Fuel. The Disneyland After Dark is a bit of a contentious one if you know the background in terms of why they changed their name. D.A.D. I think wasn't as good as the name as Disneyland After Dark, so it was a bit of a shame, but at the time I probably derailed a bit of their career as well. Next one, I've got two albums from Deep Purple, and Deep Purple is one of those bands where I've already got 5 albums and I am not aiming to get the whole set. So if I really like an artist, I will definitely get the vast majority of albums unless there's one I just don't like. Whereas other bands, I'll very much pick and choose which albums I want to get. And I'm sort of breaking a bit of a rule here because I typically don't get live albums. I'm not a massive fan of live albums, but if there's a couple of like really well-known ones that are quite iconic, then I will get them. So Made in Japan, 1972, live album, and one that is a gatefold and should be a pretty good listen. The other Deep Purple album I got though was Burn, and Burn is the album from 1974, and this is the last Deep Purple album I'm probably going to get because there's no others that I don't have that I'm really mad keen to get. Burn was the last one that I was waiting on. I really like the album cover of this. I think just it's one of those iconic ones. The head candles, it's sort of a bit weird, but it's also really identifiable. So a couple of good tracks on the album. Mistreated, Burn, probably my favourite too, and it should be a pretty good listen. The next one is now completely different from that. It is 2015's Five Finger Death Punch, Got Your Six. And this is the only album I've got from Five Finger Death Punch. And it's probably the only one that I'm aiming to get. I don't mind a couple of their albums, but it's not a band that I typically collect. This album here, though, has got a song on it called Wash It All Away. And that's why I really like this album. There are some good tracks on here, but Wash It All Away was what started me on Five Finger Death Punch. And I love the drum sound on that particular song. And being a drummer myself, one of the things I did back a couple of years ago was I transcribed all the drums for Wash It All Away. It's a great song to play, and I just love the actual sound they get off from the drums on that mix. So that's that one. Next up, we're going to go back in time. This is Foghat, Fool for the City. It's from 1975. Everyone knows the track on it, Slow Ride, is the main one. And for many years, that's the only Foghat song that I knew, Slow Ride. I recently went into a bit of a deep dive. I'm going in through a range of albums and bands that I really like to find more in their collection that I hadn't heard before. And I went big time deep into Foghat. I've listened back through their whole catalogue, and I really like some of the stuff from the mid-70s, late 70s through to just on the early 80s, where some of the that classic rock and the slide guitar. I really like some of their albums. So there is about 6 more Foghat albums that I'm planning to get and collect. But also, in reading the background to this album cover, it's a really interesting story that they filmed it one day. He's sort of doing a bit of ice fishing, I guess, in the streets of New York. And when they were setting up to do the photo, the police turned up. So it's quite a iconic sort of, to me, it captures a bit of a Lower East Side, New York area. That's Foghat. Next up, I've got 3 albums from Kiss. Now, Kiss is one of the bands where typically I'm going to collect every single album they've got, minus probably 2. There's probably 2 that I have no interest in whatsoever. And I've got from here one of the 70s albums. This is the only 70s album that I didn't have up until now. Hot on the Hell from 1974. I do really like this album. For some reason I just hadn't picked it up on vinyl yet, but it's got some classic tracks on it from that mid-70s era. I actually quite like the album cover artwork here, and I like anytime there's an album cover with somehow it's got that sort of silver background, for some reason that just sort of gets my attention a bit. I quite enjoy that. So Kiss, Hotter Than Hell. And I guess also for some reason I like the Japanese writing that they have incorporated in through here, which is both on the names but also on the back cover area there. But the next 2 Kiss albums are ones from the mid-80s, and that really completes, aside from one, anything from the 80s that I was going to collect. Now, the mid-80s weren't my favourite. Back in the late 80s when I first got into Kiss more big time, I didn't get into Animalize and Asylum anywhere near as much as perhaps many other people did. And so Animalize, 1984, I sort of heard these albums back originally on cassette, and often they were borrowed cassettes, and maybe the quality just wasn't great, and really I wasn't hearing in a really super clear version of it. And with a bit of filler tracks on some of these albums from that era, they just didn't grab my attention as something that I liked anywhere near as much as the 70s album. 70s Kiss as my favourite era, and then I got really back into them for late 80s as well. So this is, again, I think it's a really good album cover. It's one of those simple ones, but it's iconic in that it just kind of doesn't look like anything else. And that to me is one of the prime signs of a good album cover, that you see it and you straight away within a second know what it is. And then Asylum 1985 album. We're really into the 80s graphics here. It's a bit hit or miss. I don't mind the album cover. I think the artwork is actually not too bad. The back's starting to get a little bit weird. I just find Paul's look is quite disturbing in that sort of graphic, so not my favourite. But again, there's some classic tracks on there, certainly a few that I like, so definitely had to get it into the collection, Asylum. And if you like these sort of album collection hauls and tours, then perhaps just let me know in the comments so I can make a few more of them by getting some of my collection out and running through, as well as any of the new ones that I pick up. I try to do a haul probably maybe about 4 times a year, and I'm working on my collection, which is probably about not even halfway through to where I want it to be in the end. So the next one is Led Zeppelin, and this one is Presence. Presence is probably the album of theirs that I know the least, and it's one that I haven't picked up until now. I've got many of their other albums. Probably I've got all the collection apart from 2. This was one of the 2 that I needed. It's not one where, aside from maybe 2 tracks that I really had heard back in the 80s when I'd really sort of gone through and listened to all the Led Zeppelin albums. So not one that I'm familiar with. I personally hate the album cover here. It's really kind of does nothing for me. And it's probably an era when they didn't really have huge amount of hits off it. Tell me if you disagree. You may think that's a completely crazy thing to say. But Presence from 1976, still one that I do want to get into my collection to round out. Pretty much I've got all the Led Zeppelin albums once I've finished with this one more. I'll do a quick plug for how I keep track of the bands that I'm after and all the albums that I'm trying to go back through and either listen to or collect. I went through about a year ago and did a massive exercise of trying to document up every band that had an album release in the hard rock, heavy metal, glam, sleaze, anything like that sort of related era, all the way through the thrash, doom metal. I collected a list of every band in that era from 1983 to 1992 that was active and that made releases. And I put it into a document called the Metal Decade Handbook. And I've got a link to it down in my Etsy store below. If you want to get a copy of that, then feel free. That's how I go through. It's just a list of every band, the year that they first put their album out, and what country they're from, what style they're in, and what the link is to either go to their Wikipedia page or to, because many of them actually don't because they're not big enough, and another link where you can sort of see their album collection. So you can sort of keep track of where to go and find everything that they've got in their collection. So if that sounds interesting to you, check the link below and pick it up and keep track of all the albums that you're trying to find as well. Next up, I've got 3 Queen albums. Queen is another band that recently I went on a bit of a deep dive where I went through the whole catalogue, listening to all the albums that I didn't already have. So there's only a couple that I actually did have. I only had 2 at the time. I've added 3 to it, and I'm going to start with 1976's A Day at the Races. And in listening to the albums through the collection, I really found there's a lot of like really solid tracks on a lot of those albums that I probably didn't listen to back in the mid to late 80s. And now I'm going back to collect because I've got really 5 more albums in addition to the 3 I've got here that I do want to still pick up. So there's a lot of solid, consistent tracks through here. And every album you really find there's at least a couple of hits on it that you know, but I'm really just trying to find as well some of the more deeper album tracks that I never heard before that are really ones that I quite enjoy. So A Day at the Races is the first one. 1978's Jazz, an album that from the album title I absolutely hate. I just think it's just too distracting from what the album actually is in putting that out there. I like the album artwork. I think that's kind of another one where you see it and you straight away know what the album is. So Jazz from 1978. Again, it's another one with a couple of hits. Don't Stop Me Now, and things like Fat Bottom Girls and even Bicycle Race. For some reason, I always like Bicycle Race. I'm not sure why. Let Me Entertain You is another one obviously people would all know. So really solid album. I just think the title was just one of those for me that just put me off from wanting to get into it and listen to it more. And the last Queen album I've got is I've picked up 1980's The Game. So if you heard me before about the silver, as soon as I see that, I really like that album cover. That reflective mirror-like finish. I don't know what is it about it, but I just really like that look. So The Game is, and I really like the artwork itself, just in general, that idea of that photo with the black and silver, that's quite interesting to me. Silver vinyl, so see the sticker at the top. I didn't get it from Walmart, but somehow I've got the Walmart release from another retailer. Silver vinyl should be pretty interesting. And there's another couple of decent tracks on there, like another one, Bites the Dust, Crazy Little Thing Called Love. Everyone's heard those songs. So solid stuff. Next up, I'm going to go into 2 albums now from another band that I've never been a fan of, although I do collect the albums of. So that might sound completely contradictory, but we're going to start with Rush 2112. And Rush is a band where I would never call myself a fan of Rush, although I've heard most of the Rush albums. I've already got only 1 Rush album, and there's, aside from these 2 that I've picked up, there's another 6 that I'm going to be collecting because, again, I've gone through and had a deep listen to many of them, and there's usually a couple of tracks on all of them that I quite like. So even though it's not a band where I sort of get into for my real top bands of either albums that I just like start to finish, or like the progression of albums over an artist's career. These are ones where there's enough on there that I find it's something that I do want to listen to again and that I quite enjoy. So 2112 from 1976. And there's a bit of a trend here. We've still got plenty of 70s albums that I'm collecting and working through. Even though I'd probably say my main era is still the metal decade from 82 to 91, somewhere like that. And Rush, the 1978 album Hemispheres, another one where there's a few tracks on there I don't mind. Again, they're not like my favourite tracks of their back catalogue, but there's enough on there that I do find interesting. So I wanted to pick up that one. And we'll move on to another band where I've picked up one which is part of another deep dive I'm doing into listening to through their whole catalogue. I've just finished it, and it's Saxon. And I do have 2 Saxon albums already. This is Wheels of Steel from 1980, obviously a classic album. Still got like some of their real big era of when they were part of that new wave of British heavy metal explosion. Saxon's a band where I've been through many record fairs where I've like always been searching for different records, and every time I hit a Saxon album, I'd always just pass over it thinking, oh, there's something I want more, or there's just nothing on there that's going to be enough to like buy the whole album. There might be 1 or 2 tracks. And then I went back and listened to all the Saxon catalogue, and I really found that the vast majority of it I really, really liked. And I've now got 8 more albums of Saxon that I'm going to aim to collect. So I passed over it until now, but I'm going to start putting it back on my list. Saxon 1980s Wheels of Steel. And this one is in the vinyl swirl. I don't really buy records because of the colour or the sort of design of the actual vinyl. To me, that's sort of like kind of a little bit meaningless. It's a bit of obviously a marketing thing. I don't collect anything like that necessarily. However, if I can choose between one and the other, I don't mind having them occasionally just as something different for the collection. And now we'll switch gears again, and we're going to go into 1988. And this is Slayer, South of Heaven. Slayer is an album, as this is my first Slayer album. I'd listened to them enough back in the late 80s, and I had certainly sort of 3 to 4 of their main records back in that mid to late 80s era. So there's certainly tracks on there I do like and I've listened to a lot, but I've never actually collected them from that side of things. So Slayer, South of Heaven, that's one I've got now, but there's 2 more Slayer albums. Rain in Blood is one that I'm aiming to get in sort of probably the next haul or 2. So that's good. And then the last one I'm going to show you is one that I'm quite excited that I've just picked up, which is 1995's Van Halen Balance album. And this is an album where it was in that sort of mid-90s era. So, to me, it's not peak Van Halen. It's certainly not in the era where I was still mega into Van Halen, even though there was one of my main bands in the late 80s and the early 90s was definitely Van Halen's one of my top bands. I have 6 other Van Halen albums, and now that I've got this one, I've still got 3 more to go. So they've sort of a couple of escaped me until now, but I am working my way back through it. Balance is one where there's a couple of tracks on there which I really do like, and Can't Stop Loving You and Amsterdam are a couple that I really, really like off this album. I do find the album cover completely disturbing. I hate the album cover, to be honest. That's something where I don't find artistically that adds anything. And when you look at it in a modern lens, it kind of just looks like a bad AI image. Whereas at the time it would have been probably artistically difficult to create and capture. So this one is going to be a good album. I'm split between Van Halen, and I like both eras. I'm happy with the David Lee Roth albums, and I'm also happy with the Sammy Hagar albums. I can enjoy both. I don't have only one side of the camp that I prefer. I love albums and tracks from both eras. For some reason, I probably go back to the Sammy Hagar era a little bit more only because I find some of those albums, just with maybe the more modern production or a couple of the tracks where I just get deeper into than some of the earlier ones where there's a little bit more of the hits I really like, and then the sort of album tracks that are kind of just okay. So I do like both, but I'm going to be prioritizing getting those other 3 Van Halen albums as soon as I can as well. So that's my recent haul pickup. I'll be hopefully doing another one before the end of the year, but for now, tell me which of the albums that you think are the ones that you like the best out of this collection, and also which are the worst. And if you have any that you suggest out of these artists that I've got that you think I should be prioritizing, let me know as well. Love to hear your comments, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.